The average American household has a net worth of around $192,000.
Sounds okay until you find out the median, the number that actually represents most people, is $97,000, and half of that is home equity, which means most families have roughly $48,000 in actual investable assets after a lifetime of working. I keep coming back to that number, $48,000, and I can't figure out if it's depressing or clarifying. Hey, I'm Jordan, and I want to say up front that this video is going to feel different from most content about building wealth because I'm not going to try to motivate you. I've watched enough financial content to know that motivation is the wrong tool for this problem. You don't need to feel inspired. You need to understand something specific about how money actually accumulates and why the first $100,000 operates under completely different rules than everything that comes after it. Once I understood this, it changed what I did with money. Not dramatically, not overnight, but the direction shifted. There's one thing in particular I want to show you, something that happened to a friend of mine named Sasha that made this more concrete for me than any statistic ever did. I'll get to her in a bit. Hold that. First, let me show you the math that most people see but don't actually feel.
Chapter 1. Why $500 feels like proof that investing doesn't work. Most people who give up on investing early aren't giving up because they're lazy.
They're giving up because the math at the beginning is genuinely discouraging, and nobody prepares them for that. You save $5,000, you invest it, you get a 10% return, which is actually a great year. You made $500. And $500 is fine, it's nice, but it's also roughly what you'd make working 3 weekend shifts. You could have just worked a weekend and skipped the whole investing thing.
That's the feeling. And it's not irrational, it's just early. The problem is that most people judge compound interest by how it performs in year 1. That's like judging a tree by how it looks the week after you plant it. The math at $5,000 invested is genuinely unimpressive because the base is small. 10% of not much is not much. This is the phase where you're doing all the work. Every dollar in that account came from your paycheck, your decisions, your discipline. The investments aren't contributing meaningfully yet. You're the only engine. And engines alone, without leverage, are slow. I want to be honest about something here. I think most financial content undersells how hard this phase actually is. They say, trust the process and stay the course, but they don't say, this is going to feel pointless for longer than you'd like. It does. And then it doesn't. And the line between those two states is closer to $100,000 than most people realize.
Chapter 2. The number where everything shifts.
I want to come back to something. Why 100K specifically, not 50K, not 150K? There's a reason. We'll get there. Here's what changes at $100,000 and why it's not arbitrary.
Same 10% annual return. Now you made $10,000 in a year. $10,000 without doing anything, without working extra shifts, without a side project or a negotiation or anything, just owning assets for 12 months. That $10,000 is now more than many people earn in a month. Your investments are producing real money, money that has weight, money you can feel. And this is the part that surprises people. It changes how you think. When your portfolio generates $10,000 annually, you start seeing every financial decision differently. You're not just asking, can I afford this? You're asking, what does this cost me in investment terms? A $500 impulse purchase isn't just $500. It's $500 that could have compounded for 20 years. That's a completely different internal calculation. The psychological shift is as real as the mathematical one, maybe more real, because motivation that comes from watching a number move meaningfully is sustainable in a way that motivation from willpower alone is not. Chapter 3. The manual labor phase nobody names. I had a conversation with someone.
I'll call him Tobias, who was 3 years into his investing plan and seriously considering stopping. He showed me his portfolio, about $28,000. He'd contributed consistently. He'd done nothing wrong. But looking at the returns, which were a few $100s a quarter, he said, I could be using this money to actually do something. I didn't have a great answer for him in that moment. I remember saying something like, "You're in the hardest part. The part where you're doing everything right and the math is still frustrating." He looked at me like that wasn't particularly helpful. He was right, it wasn't. What I wish I said, and what I've thought about since, is that the manual labor phase has a specific endpoint. It's not vague. It's not eventually things will get easier. The shift happens at a specific scale of capital, and $100,000 is approximately where most people feel it. Below that number, you are the machine. Above it, you have a machine working alongside you. Tobias hasn't stopped. Last I heard, he was at $71,000.
He's close. He doesn't know how close.
I want to do something different here. I want you to rank these 3 things in order of how much they've actually held you back from your progress toward 100K. Don't think too long. Go with your gut. Option A, I haven't earned enough. Option B, I've earned enough but spent it. Option C, I've earned enough, kept some of it, but never really had a system. There's no wrong answer, but I'm willing to bet that for most people watching this, the honest answer is B or C. And if it's A, genuinely income is the constraint, then the rest of this video still matters, but the starting point is different. Which one is yours?
Drop A, B, or C in the comments right now. Just the letter. I look at every comment. It's going to shape the next video I make on this topic, specifically which part of the problem I go deeper on. Chapter 4. The spending that doesn't feel like spending.
Here's the thing about the manual labor phase that makes it especially hard. The obstacle isn't usually one big bad decision. It's 100 small decisions that each feel completely reasonable in isolation. The dinner out that's justified because it was a hard week. The subscription that's only $14 a month. The car payment that's manageable. The apartment upgrade that makes sense given the new job. None of these are wrong exactly, but together they form a pattern, and the pattern is every time income increases, lifestyle absorbs the increase before savings ever see it. I've done this. I got a raise at 27, and within 4 months, my expenses had expanded to match it so precisely that I could not have told you where the extra money went. I wasn't reckless. I was just not directing anything. Money without direction finds its own direction, and its natural direction is toward comfort, not toward future wealth. The people who reach $100,000 aren't people who never spent money on things they enjoyed. They're people who made the investment transfer automatic before they could spend the decision. They didn't rely on choosing to save every month. They built a system where saving happened before the choice was available.
That's actually, I want to push back on something I've heard a lot. This is not about discipline. I think framing it as discipline is wrong and counterproductive. Disciplined people burn out. Systems don't.
Chapter 5. What nobody tells you about the people around you. The social pressure piece of this is something most financial content skips because it's uncomfortable. But it's real, and I want to name it clearly. When you start taking the 100K goal seriously, when you actually start declining things, driving the older car, not upgrading the apartment, the people around you will notice, and some of them will make it weird. Not maliciously, but consistently. You can't take it with you. You're being extreme. Just enjoy your life. I've heard all of these. What I notice is that the people who say these things most often are the ones who feel, I think the word is implicated. Your choices make their choices more visible. That's uncomfortable for people. It's not a reason to resent them, but it is a reason to be prepared. Because the moments where you're most likely to abandon the goal
aren't the ones where you're alone, running the numbers, feeling motivated. They're the ones where someone you care about is looking at you like you've become a different person. And you kind of have. That's actually the point.
Chapter 6. The specific reason 100K and not some other number.
I said earlier I wanted to come back to why $100,000 is the milestone and not $50,000 or $150,000. Here's my actual answer, and it's partly math, partly psychology, partly something harder to name. At $50,000 invested with a 10% return, you're making $5,000 a year. That's real money, but it still doesn't feel like your investments are pulling meaningful weight. At $150,000, you're making $15,000, but most people don't stay the course long enough to get there without having already felt the shift. $100,000 is approximately the point where the annual return crosses into "this is more than I make in a month" territory for most people. That's the psychological threshold.
When your money earns more in a year than you make in a month, something clicks. It's not logical exactly. The math is the same at every point.
But humans don't operate on math alone. We operate on feeling, and $10,000 in annual returns feels different from $5,000. It feels like proof, not just that the strategy works, but that you could, maybe, actually get there.
Chapter 7. What Sasha figured out that I didn't.
Okay, Sasha. I mentioned her at the beginning, and I want to close that thread. Sasha and I worked at the same company for about 2 years in our mid-20s. Same salary range, similar expenses at the time. We weren't close, but we talk occasionally. I ran into her a few years ago, maybe 6 years after we'd both left that job, and she mentioned almost casually that she recently crossed $200,000 in investments. I did some quick mental math and realized she'd gotten to the first 100K during the same years I was still sorting out my system, still letting raises disappear into a slightly better version of the same life. I asked what she'd done differently.
She said something I've thought about a lot since. I just never let myself see the full paycheck. She'd set up automatic transfers the day she got her first job out of college, before she'd built expensive habits, before lifestyle had a baseline to defend.
The money moved before she could decide to keep it.
That's it. That was the whole thing. Not a sophisticated investment strategy, not exceptional income. Just the transfer happened first. I set mine up the following week. I was 29. I keep thinking about what it would have looked like if I had done it at 22.
Chapter 8. The second 100K is a different game. Once you're past $100,000, the mechanics change in ways that are hard to describe before you've experienced them. The most significant one isn't the money, it's the options. When you have $100,000 in liquid assets, opportunities that weren't available before become real. A friend calls about an investment property that needs a fast close. You can have a conversation instead of immediately saying you don't have it. Your company offers stock options with a 5-year hold. You can actually participate. You can take a calculated risk on a career move because you have a cushion that makes the downside survivable.
None of this is guaranteed. Not every opportunity is good.
But the difference between having options and not having options is the difference between being reactive and being strategic about your financial life. And on the math side, at $200,000, a 10% year is $20,000. At $300,000, it's $30,000. The slope of the curve gets steeper the further up you go. That's compound growth doing what it does. You're still contributing, but the contributions feel different when the account is also growing on its own at a meaningful pace. The second 100K doesn't feel like the first. The first feels like willpower. The second feels like momentum.
What's the number in your investment account right now? Not your bank account, your investment account. Do you know it without looking? That number, whatever it is the starting point, not the whole story. just the starting point. The people who built real wealth didn't start with different numbers. They started with the same numbers you have. They just stopped waiting until the situation felt more ready. If this gave you something concrete, subscribe. No hype here.
Just honest thinking about money, regularly. Next video, I want to talk about the specific accounts in the specific order that make the automatic system actually work. Not the theory, the exact steps. I'm Jordan. Don't look at where you are and feel behind. Look at where the transfer is going and feel like you started.
The first 100K is slow. Then it isn't.